Imagine going to sleep in a world that feels permanent. Children laughing in nearby homes, fires glowing softly in hearths, rituals repeated just as they were by generations before you. And then imagine waking up to a silence, so complete it feels unnatural. No footsteps, no voices, no smoke rising into the sky. Across ancient history, this didn't happen once. It happened again and again. Entire societies, some advanced, some artistic, some deeply spiritual, vanished so quickly that even centuries later we struggle to explain how. Not destroyed in dramatic flames, not slowly eroded by time, simply gone. Archaeologists still kneel in these abandoned places, finding meals left unfinished, tools set down as if their owners planned to return. They never did. And the most unsettling part isn't that these civilizations disappeared, it's how easily it happened. Tonight, we step into that silence and ask a question that still has no comfortable answer. If they could vanish overnight, what does that say about the illusion of permanence we live with today? In the quiet hours of the night, when the world softens into stillness and the mind drifts between wakefulness and wandering, history feels different. It becomes less like a strict chronology of dates and battles, and more like a gentle landscape of forgotten footsteps, distant fires, and voices that once echoed through ancient valleys. This documentary opens within that soft landscape, a place where mystery and memory blend, where the past is not loud or urgent, but calm, almost dreamlike. Here, in this soothing darkness, we begin our journey into the most bizarre ancient societies that seem to vanish in a single moment, leaving behind only fragments to whisper their stories. Civilizations, for most of us, feel permanent. We imagine them as slow-building, slow-fading tapestries woven over centuries. But throughout human history, there have been cultures so unusual, so uniquely shaped by their environments and beliefs, that their disappearance feels almost unreal, as if they stepped behind a curtain and never returned. These were societies filled with vibrant rituals, intricate craftsmanship, and ways of living that do not resemble anything familiar to us now. And yet, despite their creativity and resilience, they slipped out of existence with stunning speed. Archaeologists search for traces, historians debate causes, but the truth often sits in a space between the known and the unknowable. It is within this space that our exploration finds its tone, not rushing to conclusions, not forcing explanations, but sitting quietly with the mysteries they left behind. These societies remind us that history is not a single, continuous march. It is a field of bright sparks, some lasting millennia, others flickering briefly before darkness settles again. They also reveal how delicate human worlds can be, shaped by shifting rivers, trembling ground, wandering storms, and the unpredictable choices of neighbors and rivals. Some were undone by nature's sudden wrath, others by silent plagues, others still by internal unraveling, where the threads that held a community together gave way in a single generation. In the soothing rhythm of this documentary, we revisit these lost worlds not with alarm, but with gentle curiosity. What does it mean for an entire society to vanish overnight? How does a lively settlement, filled with routines and laughter and the clatter of daily labor, become an abandoned ruin, swallowed by earth and silence? When excavators kneel in the dust centuries later, what clues do they find, and what puzzles remain stubbornly unsolved? The contrast between what we can confidently say and what we can only imagine creates a calm tension, the kind that invites the mind to drift, not with anxiety, but with wonder. Picture a village alive with dawn rituals, where smoke curls from clay ovens and small, barefoot children run between houses built in ways we would not expect today. Picture a bustling coastal town where fishermen carry nets woven in patterns handed down through generations, unaware that the sea levels are about to shift dramatically. Picture a mountain city perched above the clouds, carved into stone, its people observing traditions as old as their ancestors' bones. And then imagine how quickly these scenes can dissolve. A flood, a famine, a conqueror, or sometimes no clear cause at all. The suddenness becomes its own mystery, a quiet question echoing across centuries. As we wander through each society's story, we will move gently, with the pacing of a soft nighttime guided tour. There will be no rush, no harsh transitions. Instead, one world will fade into the next like a slow breath, allowing you to settle into the rhythm of forgotten histories. Each society we visit will offer something unusual: odd architecture, unfamiliar beliefs, surprising burial customs, or social structures that challenge modern assumptions. And in their sudden endings, each will reveal something about the delicate balance between survival and disappearance. This introduction opens the door to that long, twilight walk. Before we step fully into the first civilization, take a moment to imagine the sheer vastness of human existence. Thousands of societies across thousands of years, most of them now silent. Only a fraction remain remembered, and even fewer are understood. The rest lie beneath sand, silt, and forest floor, waiting for chance discovery or fading slowly into nothing. Our journey tonight honors those nearly forgotten worlds, not to solve every mystery, but to appreciate the strange beauty of what remains. As the soft edges of the past settle around us, we prepare to enter the first of these vanished worlds, a place with no streets, no familiar order, and no clear explanation for how such a large community could simply empty itself. A city built in a way unlike any other at its time. A city that seemed for generations to thrive until it didn't. With a gentle step, we move now toward Catalhook, where walls, rooftops, and ancient murals offer the first clues in our quiet exploration of those who disappeared overnight. In the soft glow of archaeological imagination, Catalhook rises from the plains of ancient Anatolia like a strange dream preserved in dust. When we speak of early human settlements, we usually picture simple huts scattered loosely across open land. But Catalhoyuk breaks every expectation. It was one of the world's earliest proto-urban communities, yet it lacked the very element that defines a city: streets. Homes were pressed tightly against one another, forming a continuous honeycomb of mud brick structures with no ground-level entrances. Instead, people moved across the rooftops, climbing down through ceiling openings into their dim, warm interior rooms. This single architectural choice sets the tone for the community's mystery, a society that lived in ways that still puzzle researchers today. Imagine the daily rhythm of such a place. At dawn, villagers would emerge not through doors, but from above, stepping out onto their flat roofs and into the amber light. The rooftops functioned like shared courtyards, bustling with activity as people cooked, repaired tools, and socialized. Below, inside the houses, the air was thick with the scent of packed earth and smoke from hearth fires. Storage bins lined the walls. Intricate plaster reliefs featuring bull's horns, birds, and enigmatic human shapes decorated the interiors. Life here was crowded, intimate, and deeply interconnected, both physically and socially. It is within this closeness that the enigma of their sudden disappearance becomes even more striking. Catalhoyuk was no brief experiment. It flourished for more than 1,000 years, growing layer upon layer, as each house was rebuilt directly on top of the previous one. The residents seemed to have a powerful commitment to place, to continuity, and to shared ritual life. Yet at some point, this commitment faltered. The settlement thinned, then emptied, leaving behind a labyrinth of silent rooms, buried ancestors, and walls adorned with fading pigments. Why did they leave? And why so abruptly, after centuries of resilience? One of the most unusual aspects of the Catalhoyuk community lies in how they integrated the living and the dead. Beneath the very floors where daily life unfolded, families buried their loved ones, placing them in carefully prepared graves and often reopening them years later to retrieve certain bones, perhaps as relics, perhaps as symbols within collective rituals. In a modern context, such closeness between life and death feels unsettling. Yet for the people of Catalhoyuk, it was a natural rhythm. Life and death flowed together, the past literally supporting the present. This relationship adds a gentle eeriness to the site, a reminder of how deeply ancient societies intertwine memory, spirituality, and domestic life. Inside the homes, the walls reveal more clues. Many rooms feature repeated layers of plaster, each painted or sculpted with symbolic imagery. Vultures looming over headless human figures, geometric patterns whose meanings have been lost, and bull skulls set in shrines like guardians watching over the household. Some researchers interpret these as expressions of myth or cosmology. Others see them as reflections of seasonal rituals or clan identities. But the precise meanings remain elusive. The more we study, the more questions arise. It is this elegant balance of evidence and mystery that makes Catalhoyuk such a compelling chapter in our journey. When archaeologists search for reasons behind the settlement's sudden abandonment, they consider a wide range of factors. Environmental stress, including shifts in water availability and soil quality, may have pushed the community beyond its limits. The tightly packed architecture, while socially cohesive, may have also facilitated the spread of disease. There is evidence of changing dietary patterns, fluctuations in livestock health, and possible social tensions as the population grew. But none of these explanations alone accounts for an abrupt ending. Instead, it seems likely that a combination of pressures gradually weakened the community until one final threshold was crossed, prompting a decisive departure. What makes Catalhoyuk especially fascinating is that its end contrasts sharply with its longevity. This was not a fragile settlement. It persisted through generations of change, adapting in subtle ways while maintaining consistent ritual patterns. The people showed remarkable resilience and creativity. Yet resilience is not permanence. Even the most adaptive societies can reach a tipping point, where the structure that once sustained life becomes unsustainable. And in the soft silence that follows their disappearance, the rooftops that once echoed with laughter and footsteps stand empty, slowly merging back into the earth. As we imagine the people's final days in the settlement, there's a gentle melancholy in the thought of rooms being abandoned, hearths going cold, and doorless homes left to collapse from within. The murals, once bright with meaning, began to flake. The ancestral remains beneath the floors stayed where they had always been, witnessing the last footsteps fade away. Whether the departure was orderly or rushed, peaceful or strained, will forever remain uncertain. And perhaps that uncertainty is what gives Catalhoyuk its enduring beauty, a mystery wrapped not in dramatic catastrophe, but in quiet disappearance. There's also something deeply poetic in the idea of a city without streets fading into history without leaving a clear trail. A place defined by absence, no doors, no paths, no boundaries, eventually becoming absent itself. The contrast between its vibrant communal life and its sudden emptiness highlights the fragile line between presence and vanishing. This contrast is what draws nighttime listeners, seekers of calm curiosity, into the gentle puzzle of Catalhoyuk. In the larger tapestry of ancient human stories, Catalhoyuk is a reminder that innovation alone does not guarantee survival. Architecture can be bold, rituals can be rich, and social bonds can be strong. And still, a society can slip quietly out of existence. The reasons may be ordinary, but the effect feels extraordinary. A thriving settlement, once humming with life, turning into a layered mound of dust-covered secrets. As we prepare to move on from Catalhoyuk, hold onto the image of its rooftops stretching across the plain like a single continuous surface, alive with movement. Beneath those rooftops lay generations of stories. Births, burials, celebrations, disputes, meals, dreams. All of it compressed into a single architectural puzzle left for us to decipher. And as we step away from this ancient enigma, we carry with us the sense that humanity has always lived at the delicate edge between flourishing and disappearance. Gently, our path now leads toward another society once shaped by water instead of earth, by reed and marsh instead of mud-brick architecture. Where Catalhook rose from dry plains, the next vanished world floated on water, built in the shimmering heart of the Mesopotamian marshlands. From a city without streets, we drift toward a world without solid ground, a community that thrived upon the breath of rivers, only to vanish as the waters changed in ways they could not foresee. When we step away from Catalhook's tightly clustered rooftops and descend back into the quiet flow of history, a gentle realization begins to settle in. The collapse of a society is rarely a singular event. Instead, it is often a slow weaving of many threads, some visible, others hidden deep beneath the layers of time. As we move through this bridge between ancient worlds, the patterns left in the dust become our guide. They remind us that disappearance is never just an ending. It is also part of a larger rhythm that has echoed throughout human existence. In the soft darkness of nighttime reflection, these rhythms feel almost meditative. The rise and fall of cultures resemble the ebb and flow of tides, washing forward with creativity and retreating with quiet inevitability. In Catalhook, we saw how tightly bound people were to their environment and their traditions. Their departure may have been sudden, but the forces that shaped it were not. They gathered slowly. Changes in climate, shifts in social life, pressures that accumulated silently over generations. When we zoom out, we begin to notice that such patterns are not unique to one settlement or one era. They repeat with gentle insistence across continents and millennia. This bridge invites us to linger on those repetitions. Consider how many societies, vibrant and seemingly secure, faced abrupt endings due to fragile environmental balance. Water drying, rivers shifting, forests thinning. Each subtle change can reshape a community's fate. Others faltered when internal harmony broke, when rituals that once united began to lose their meaning, or when power struggles created fractures that no amount of tradition could mend. Some succumbed to illnesses that moved invisibly, much as they do today. And some were undone by events so rapid and unexpected that those living through them may barely have understood what was unfolding. Yet the mystery remains. Why do some societies adapt while others vanish? The clues rarely reveal full answers. Archaeologists uncover tools, foundations, fragments of meals, and traces of ritual items. But these artifacts cannot tell us the emotions of the final days, the conversations held in hushed tones, or the moment when the decision to leave became unavoidable. The dust holds patterns, but not the full story. And within this quiet gap between evidence and imagination, a soft wonder arises, the kind that suits a late-night exploration like this one. As we reflect on these patterns, another contrast reveals itself. The difference between what survives physically and what survives symbolically. In many ancient places, the structures remain, weathered but standing. But the meanings behind them, the beliefs, the identities, the reasons, fade much faster. It is as if the physical world has a longer memory than culture itself. And so, these vanished societies leave behind empty architecture, stripped of its spirit, waiting for us to make sense of what they left behind. In this way, the dust becomes both a record and a veil. This gentle meditation serves not as an interruption, but as a soft transition, a way of letting one ancient world dissolve slowly before the next emerges. From the dry plains of Catalhook, where rooftops once formed a living maze, our journey will soon move toward a very different landscape, one shaped entirely by water. The contrast between the two societies emphasizes the diversity of human adaptation. One built dense clusters of homes on packed earth. The other built delicate communities among reeds, marshes, and slow-moving channels. The patterns in the dust suggest that the forces shaping collapse are universal, even if the settings are not. Whether on plains or in marshlands, whether made of mud brick or reeds, every society must navigate the same delicate balance between environment, culture, and change. And just as Catalhook met its quiet end, so too did the marsh dwellers who lived in watery worlds now lost to silt and time. As we breathe out this transition and prepare to step into their domain, the world around us softens again. The dust fades, replaced by glimmering reflections of ancient waters. Roofs give way to floating reeds. Dry soil becomes shimmering marsh. And in that gentle shift, we follow the patterns of history toward a civilization that lived at the water's edge, only to vanish as silently as it once emerged. In the ancient Mesopotamian delta, where the Tigris and Euphrates once braided themselves into a shimmering maze of waterways, there existed a world that felt almost suspended between land and sky. This was the realm of the marsh dwellers, a society that did not rise from solid ground like most civilizations, but floated gently upon water, reeds, and shifting islands of silt. Their homes, their livelihoods, even their spirituality were shaped by the gentle rhythm of wetlands. And yet, this delicately balanced world, so carefully attuned to the breath of rivers, would eventually vanish in a way that still leaves scholars puzzled. The marshes themselves shifted and shrank, swallowing the traces of those who once thrived there. Imagine approaching their settlements from afar. Instead of walls or towers, the first thing you would see was the glimmer of reflected light, a village mirrored on calm waters. Houses made from bundled reeds rose in elegant curves, their surfaces catching the warm glow of sunrise. These structures were light, flexible, and renewably built each year, adapting to the marsh's constant movement. Wooden poles anchored them in place, but the water beneath kept the entire community connected by narrow channels. Boats were not luxuries here, but essential parts of daily life. For the marsh dwellers, water was not an obstacle. It was a road, a pantry, a protector, and a companion. Their days unfolded with a serenity shaped by the landscape. Fishermen glided across the water in slim canoes, casting nets that sparkled with droplets. Women gathered reeds for weaving huts, mats, baskets, and even small sculptures. Children swam and played in the shallows, unafraid of the unfamiliar creatures beneath the surface. Livestock, especially water buffalo, lingered at the edges of the reeds, cooling themselves in the marsh pools. It was a quiet existence, but not a primitive one. Evidence of their craftsmanship shows advanced weaving patterns, intricate tools, and a deep understanding of hydrology. They knew how to manage floods, redirect water, and maintain delicate ecosystems long before those concepts became scientific fields. Spiritually, the marsh dwellers seemed to develop beliefs shaped by the vast openness and mysterious depths of their environment. Water deities, marsh spirits, and protective guardians made from reeds were likely part of their ritual life, though exact details remain lost. Archaeologists have found traces of ceremonial areas built on raised mounds, places where earth rose just enough above water for people to gather and honor forces larger than themselves. The interplay between life and nature was central to their worldview. The marsh was both nourishment and teacher, both shelter and mystery. And yet, despite this harmony, their world was fragile. The same water that fed their community also threatened to erase it. A shift in river courses, which happened often in Mesopotamia, could cut off entire villages from fresh water. Silt buildup could transform open channels into dense marshland or dry ground. Conversely, unexpected flooding could drown crops, destroy homes, and scatter livestock. Every year, the marsh dwellers rebuilt and readjusted, but such resilience had limits. A sudden hydrological shift, perhaps driven by climate changes or tectonic activity, may have destabilized the delicate balance they depended on. There is another layer to their disappearance, one woven from the complexities of human ambition. As powerful city-states like Ur and Uruk expanded, control of waterways became a matter of political strategy. Redirecting rivers could benefit one city while drowning or drying out another. It is possible that the marsh dwellers found themselves caught in the currents of larger geopolitical forces. A deliberate change in water routes could unintentionally or intentionally dismantle the ecological foundation of their homes. The marsh people, bound deeply to their environment, may have had little choice but to abandon their settlements as conditions shifted beyond repair. Yet, studying their disappearance offers another mystery. They left behind almost no written record. Their light, biodegradable architecture decayed quickly. Their tools, often made of reed, bone, or unfired clay, dissolved back into the marsh. Even their burial practices remain uncertain. Bodies placed in wet soil may not preserve long enough for discovery. What remains is fragmentary. Traces of hearths, impressions of reed mats, and clusters of pottery shards found in once inhabited islands. The silence of this archaeological record enhances the dreamlike quality of their story. They lived in a world that leaves very little behind. Scholars sometimes describe them as a society that moved with the water, which makes the notion of sudden disappearance especially striking. To vanish overnight suggests a force more dramatic than usual ecological change. Perhaps a major flood swallowed an entire region, scattering survivors inland. Perhaps a prolonged drought dried the marshes to cracking earth, forcing a collective migration. Perhaps political upheaval or invasion disrupted their way of life so swiftly that settlement continuity broke in a single generation. Whatever the reason, their departure seems to have been swift enough that a once thriving way of life faded without leaving a coherent trace. Even today, the Mesopotamian Delta reveals how quickly this environment can transform. Modern efforts to restore the marshes show how water can erase or rebuild landscapes almost instantly. With each fluctuation, it becomes easier to imagine how the ancient marsh dwellers might have faced a dramatic moment, a shift so sudden that their reed houses, so deeply connected to the water, simply could not endure. Their disappearance becomes not just a historical puzzle, but a poetic reminder of how human lives are intertwined with the pulse of nature. In a broader sense, their vanishing highlights the delicate relationship between environment and identity. To live in the marshes was not simply to live near water. It was to understand water's moods, to build with materials that grew around you, to move at the pace of tides and currents. When that environment changed, the very core of their existence shifted as well. Their culture, so uniquely shaped by wetlands, had no way to replicate itself in the dry plains or crowded city-states beyond. And so, the people themselves dispersed into other communities, absorbed by larger cultures, their unique marsh identity fading into the broader human tapestry. As we step away from their watery world, we carry with us the image of a society that thrived not through monumental architecture or military power, but through harmony with a landscape few others could master. Their disappearance is not marked by dramatic ruins, but by an absence, a quiet vanishing swallowed by silt, water, and time. The marshes themselves became their tomb, their memory, and their final refuge. Our journey now moves toward another ancient society whose brilliance and mystery linger in carved stone rather than reeds. From shimmering wetland villages, we travel toward the mountains of Anatolia, where a people known as the Lycians left behind tombs carved into cliffs, monuments of permanence standing in contrast to the fragile, floating homes of the marsh dwellers. High along the rugged coastline of ancient Anatolia, where mountains rise sharply from the turquoise Mediterranean and the air carries the scent of pine and salt, lived a people whose identity remains as captivating as the landscape they inhabited. These were the Lycians, a civilization remembered not through written chronicles or sprawling ruins, but through the way they carved their presence directly into the cliffs. Their tombs, suspended high above valleys and harbors, appear like silent guardians watching over a world that once hummed with life. These stone monuments are some of the most haunting remnants of any ancient society, not because of what they show, but because of everything they leave unsaid. And just as mysteriously as they emerged into historical awareness, the Lycians seem to fade almost overnight, dissolving into neighboring cultures, leaving behind only questions carved in rock. To picture a Lycian city at its height, imagine walking through narrow mountain passes where limestone cliffs glow golden under the afternoon sun. The sound of distant waves breaks softly against the coves below, while terrace settlements cling to steep slopes. Houses made of timber and stone overlooked fertile valleys where olives, grapes, and grain grew in abundance. The Lycians were skilled sailors too, navigating the treacherous Aegean waters in elegantly crafted ships, returning with goods and stories from distant regions. Their society was neither isolated nor dominant. Instead, it thrived through a balance of autonomy, trade, and cultural fusion. Yet even within this welcoming mixture, they maintained traditions that were distinctly their own. One of the most remarkable aspects of Lycian culture was its unusual social structure. Most ancient societies traced descent through the father's line, but in Lycia, lineage flowed through the mother. Children were identified not by their father's name, but their mother's clan. This matrilineal system puzzled early Greek historians, who struggled to understand why a child's identity should be tied to maternal ancestry. The Lycians seemed unbothered by such confusion. Their customs existed long before outsiders took notice, suggesting a worldview that valued maternal heritage in ways other cultures did not. The reasons remain unclear, whether rooted in spiritual beliefs, economic roles, or ancient tradition, but the effect is unmistakable. Lycia was a place where social identity followed a rhythm unlike the societies around it. Their language deepens the mystery. The Lycian tongue, written in a unique script, has been partially deciphered through bilingual inscriptions found in later periods. Yet even with linguistic breakthroughs, much of their literature, if it existed at all, remains lost. What survives hints at a rich mythology, administrative complexity, and a proud sense of community. However, the lack of extensive texts forces us to look elsewhere for insight into their lives. And nowhere is that insight more striking than in their funerary architecture. The Lycian tombs are nothing short of extraordinary. Some resemble wooden houses, a deliberate choice to recreate the familiarity of home for the dead. Others, carved high into mountain faces, mimic the front of grand temples, complete with columns and intricate friezes. These tombs were not merely burial places. They were messages crafted in stone, meant to outlast generations. They tell us that the Lycians believed deeply in honoring their ancestors, preserving their memory in a way that ensured both visibility and reverence. To carve a tomb into a cliff required immense effort, planning, and communal participation. The fact that so many exist suggests a society with strong spiritual cohesion and considerable wealth. But the most haunting detail is this. Despite the permanence of their stone tombs, the people themselves vanished almost without warning. Their decline began quietly. External pressure from expanding empires, first the Persians, then the Greeks, and later the Romans, slowly chipped away at Lycian independence. Unlike societies that collapsed through sudden disaster, the Lycians faced a gradual erosion of autonomy. Their language faded as Greek became dominant. Their political system, once organized through a rare democratic federation of cities, lost influence under foreign governance. Even their beliefs changed as new religions moved through the region. And yet, within these slow transformations, something surprising happened. The Lycian cultural identity evaporated faster than expected, dissolving into the broader Hellenistic world in what felt like a single historical breath. Archaeologists and historians still struggle to pinpoint the exact moment when Lycia stopped being Lycian. It seems to happen between recorded events in the quiet gaps of history. One generation spoke the Lycian language, the next did not. One era followed matrilineal customs, the next adopted foreign norms. The change was not marked by dramatic battles or catastrophic ruin. Instead, it was a cultural unrooting, subtle, pervasive, and swift. This kind of disappearance, though less visible than violent collapse, is equally mysterious. How does a society so deeply connected to its land, identity, and ancestors drift so suddenly into historical silence? standing before their tombs. The contrast becomes almost poetic. The stone stands firm, carved with precision and devotion. The cliffs hold these monuments like open books. But the people who carve them have no direct surviving stories, no preserved literature, no thriving descendant culture carrying their name. They spoke through stone, and stone is what remains. Their disappearance becomes a lesson in how cultural permanence is not measured by material endurance. The most elaborate structures can remain perfectly intact, while the identity that created them disappears without a trace. There's also something deeply human in this enigma. The Lycians were not overtaken by a single calamity, nor did they experience a dramatic downfall. Instead, they experienced what happens to many cultures in transitional regions: the gentle erosion of identity in the face of stronger external influences. This process can be as sudden as any disaster when viewed from the wider perspective of millennia. A few decades, a century at most, that is all it takes for a unique cultural system to fragment and vanish. As nighttime listeners, we can sit with this thought quietly. The Lycians remind us that disappearance can be peaceful, almost invisible. A society does not need flames or floods to fade. Sometimes it simply steps into the larger currents of history and is carried away. Their tombs, still standing in silent cliffs, become the final markers of a people who once believed in the necessity of remembering, even as they themselves slipped into the realm of the forgotten. The last centuries of Lycian life show an intriguing blend of continuity and collapse. Even as their autonomy waned, they continued carving tombs. Even as their language weakened, their artistic traditions persisted. This tension, the presence of cultural fragments alongside the absence of a living culture, makes Lycia one of history's gently unsettling mysteries. It is a society that left behind solid monuments, yet disappeared with surprising softness. As we depart from the Lycian world, imagine the dimming light falling across their cliffside tombs. Shadows fill the carved doorways, and the sea breeze moves through the valleys where their voices once echoed. Their stone monuments remain, but the people have long since walked away from their ancient paths, never to return. From these carved mountains of Anatolia, our path now drifts toward another reflection, a quiet bridge that binds stone memories to the fragile traces of cultures yet to come in our journey. The cliffs of Lycia fade behind us slowly, their stone tombs shrinking into silhouettes against the softening sky. As we move forward, the echo of those carved walls lingers in the quiet air, a reminder of how deeply human hands try to resist the pull of time. This bridge serves as a gentle pause, a moment to breathe between worlds, to reflect on how societies attempt to speak to the future even as their voices begin to fade. The Lycians carved stone to preserve themselves, yet their identities vanished faster than their monuments. This contrast becomes our guide now, leading us into a meditation on memory, endurance, and the strange ways history chooses what to keep and what to let slip away. Stone, for most civilizations, is the ultimate symbol of permanence. It resists erosion, fire, decay. It stands guard over centuries, sometimes millennia, holding details that wooden homes and fragile fabrics cannot. And yet, stone can preserve only the physical, the outlines of architecture, the shapes of symbols, the silhouettes of belief. What it cannot hold is the living pulse of a culture, the melodies of its language, the emotions behind its rituals, the laughter and sorrow that once filled its spaces. The Lycian tombs remain, perfectly perched in rock faces, but the people who carved them left behind only glimmers of who they were. It is a quiet lesson in how even the most enduring materials cannot capture the fullness of a vanished world. As we move through this bridge, the contrast grows clearer. Some societies leave behind almost too much to study: inscriptions, monuments, roads, and records that fill museums and textbooks. Others, like the marsh dwellers we visited before Lycia, leave behind fragile traces that nature reclaims almost faster than they can be found. And then there are societies like the Lycians, whose material legacy endures in stone, yet whose cultural essence dissolved almost overnight. Between these extremes lies a vast spectrum of human memory, shaped not only by what people built but by how and where they built it. This is where the echo of stone becomes symbolic. In a quiet nighttime reflection, the cliffside tombs feel like reminders that civilizations are always talking to the future, even unintentionally. Every object they create, every structure they raise, contains a whisper meant for someone, perhaps a descendant, perhaps a deity, perhaps a stranger far beyond their time. But history's memory is unpredictable. It keeps what it can, loses what it must, and transforms what remains into mysteries for later generations to unravel. There is a softness in recognizing this unpredictability. It allows us to approach each vanished society not with urgency, but with gentle curiosity. It invites us to accept that some questions may never be answered fully, and that this incompleteness can be beautiful rather than frustrating. When we look at the carved Lycian tombs, we see skill, reverence, and artistry, but we also see absence. That absence is not an emptiness, but a quiet space where imagination and evidence meet. As we cross this bridge, let us also notice how stone itself speaks in metaphors. It is heavy, enduring, unmoving, the opposite of the marsh dwellers' reed structures and floating homes. Yet both societies vanished. Both left behind clues that shape our understanding of the past. One dissolved into water, the other endured in stone, but both disappeared from the living world with surprising speed. This duality reminds us that collapse does not favor the fragile or the strong. It moves where it will, reshaping the human story in ways that often defy expectation. This reflection gently guides us toward the next world in our journey, a place where stone is not carved into cliffs but shaped by volcanic earth and fertile forests, where societies did not cling to rocky mountainsides or watery marshes, but instead embraced the rhythm of islands and coastlines. The patterns of disappearance will continue, but the landscapes will shift. And in that shift, new mysteries will emerge. Mysteries shaped not by stone guardians, but by ancient pottery, seaside rituals, and spiritual figurines buried beneath forested soil. As the echoes in the carved walls soften and drift behind us, we step toward a new horizon, one edged by salt air, dense forests, and early coastal traditions. Ahead lies the world of the Jaman Islanders, whose artistry and sudden disappearance invite us into another chapter of the quiet, enduring enigma of civilizations that fade almost as swiftly as they rise. Across the sea, where dense forests meet rugged coastlines and mist rolls gently over ancient shorelines, the world of the Jaman people slowly emerges, a world unlike any we have explored so far. Section 7 brings us into the heart of one of the most mysterious and artistically rich prehistoric societies on Earth, a culture that thrived for thousands of years on the islands of what is now Japan. The Jaman did not build vast cities, towering monuments, or expansive empires. Instead, they crafted a life woven from earth, fire, forest, and sea, a life so deeply connected to nature that it almost feels otherworldly. And yet, for all their stability and longevity, their culture underwent a series of dramatic transformations, leading to the puzzling decline of a society that once seemed unshakable. As we settle into this soft, nighttime journey, imagine the landscape they inhabited. Thick cedar forests rising like cathedral pillars, volcanic mountains breathing quiet heat, rivers rushing with cold, clear water, and coastlines rich with shellfish, fish, and seaweed. The sounds were different here, the soft tapping of wooden tools, the whisper of waves, the call of distant birds. It was a world shaped by rhythm rather than conquest, by survival rather than expansion. The Jaman lived in small, stable communities, creating an early example of a sedentary hunter-gatherer society long before farming became the norm elsewhere in the world. What makes the Jaman stand out is their artistry. They are known for some of the oldest and most intricate pottery on Earth, vessels adorned with swirling patterns, raised ridges, and flame-like designs that seem almost alive when touched by light. These were not simple containers. They were expressions of creativity, spirituality, and identity. Many pieces appear ceremonial, perhaps used in rituals honoring the natural world. Even today, these pots feel strangely modern, as if the hands that shaped them understood aesthetics in ways that resonate far beyond their time. But their artistry extended beyond pottery. The Jamin crafted haunting figurines known as dogu, small, stylized human forms with exaggerated features, large almond-shaped eyes, and mysterious markings. Some resemble guardians, others appear wounded, pregnant, or armored. Their exact purpose remains debated. Were they used in fertility rites, healing rituals, ancestor worship, or something else entirely? The truth is buried beneath layers of time, but their enigmatic presence offers glimpses into a belief system deeply rooted in nature, transformation, and perhaps even the unseen world. Despite their peaceful relationship with the land, the Jamin were not immune to change. Their society endured for over 10,000 years, a span longer than many of the world's most famous civilizations combined. Yet they ultimately declined in a way that feels almost instantaneous when viewed through the long lens of history. The reasons are layered, elusive, and complex. Climate shifts played a major role. As temperatures cooled during the late Jamin period, food sources changed dramatically. Forests that once provided abundant nuts and game receded. Coastal resources diminished. Environmental stress began to strain communities that had survived comfortably for millennia. Some archaeological evidence suggests population decline, especially in northern regions. Settlements shrank, hunting patterns shifted, and rituals changed. The artistry that once flourished grew more restrained, perhaps reflecting a society grappling with instability. The Jamin, who had lived in harmony with their environment for so long, suddenly faced forces they could not fully adapt to. Even their iconic pottery styles transformed, the dynamic flame motifs giving way to simpler designs, as if echoing a cultural contraction. Yet climate alone cannot explain everything. Another layer of mystery emerges in the arrival of new groups, people who brought rice agriculture, new technologies, and different ways of living. These later arrivals, often referred to as the Yayoi, gradually spread across the islands. Their farming-based lifestyle offered stability that hunting and gathering could no longer guarantee. And so, slowly at first, then more rapidly, the Jamin world began to dissolve under the weight of cultural blending, competition, and transformation. But the Jamin did not simply vanish. Here lies the gentle contradiction at the heart of their story. They disappeared as a distinct society, yet their genetic and cultural traces live on. Modern populations in Japan, especially in northern regions, carry noticeable Jamin ancestry. Their traditions linger in subtle ways, in spirituality, in folklore, in respect for nature, even in certain artistic motifs. This dual presence and absence creates a unique historical echo. The Jamin ended, yet they never fully left. This paradox is part of what makes their story so compelling. Their disappearance is not abrupt in the sense of a sudden catastrophe, but it feels overnight when set against their astonishingly long existence. A society that lasted for 10 millennia softened and faded over just a few centuries like a long, deep breath exhaled at last. Their decline is quiet, gradual, and almost poetic, erosion rather than destruction, transformation rather than extinction. It is a different kind of collapse, one that invites gentler contemplation. Walking through the remnants of Jamin sites today, one finds quiet earth mounds, buried pottery shards, and forested hollows where homes once stood. These traces feel intimate, as if the land itself has cradled their memory. Unlike the carved lichen tombs or the vanished reed houses of the marsh dwellers, Jamin heritage blends seamlessly into its environment, just as it once did in life. Their world whispers rather than declares, leaving behind questions that hum softly in the background of archaeological study. As we move toward the end of this section, a subtle contrast emerges, one that enriches the narrative of our documentary. The Jamin represent a society that seemed incredibly stable, yet still succumbed to forces beyond its control. Their longevity highlights how successful humans can be at adapting to nature. Their decline, meanwhile, shows how even the most harmonious relationships can be disrupted. In this delicate tension between endurance and fragility, the Jamin teach us that complexity exists even in the most peaceful societies. And so, as the mist settles along their ancient shorelines and the figurines rest beneath layers of earth, we gently step away from their world. Ahead lies another society shaped by mystery and sudden disappearance, one not born in forests or marshlands, but in sweeping mountain valleys and stark desert landscapes. The transition will reveal new patterns, new enigmas, and new lessons about the fragile thread of human existence. Across vast stretches of river plains and rugged foothills, where the early civilizations of South Asia once pulsed with life, a different kind of society quietly formed on the fringes of the Indus Valley. Section 8 draws us into the lesser-known world of the Indus frontier communities, groups who lived beside one of the most advanced ancient civilizations, yet followed their own distinct rhythms, beliefs, and ways of life. Their settlements were smaller, more scattered, and shaped by environments both generous and unpredictable. And though they stood in the shadow of a mighty river-based culture, they cultivated their own identity, one that flourished briefly and then disappeared with startling speed. Their story is less famous than that of Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, yet it carries mysteries just as deep and perhaps even more enigmatic. Imagine this landscape through the quiet lens of a nighttime documentary. The soft murmur of river tributaries weaving through dry plains, the distant outlines of low hills dark against the horizon, and clusters of early homes illuminated only by small hearth fires. These frontier people lived at the boundary between abundance and scarcity. They benefited from proximity to the fertile Indus region, yet they also braved harsher climates and shifting landscapes that made survival a delicate balance. Instead of grand urban planning, they built modest settlements, villages of mud brick houses arranged in simple, organic patterns rather than strict grids. Their world carried a quieter hum than the busy centers of Indus trade, but it was no less significant. What makes these frontier societies so compelling is the contrast between what they borrowed from the Indus civilization and what they forged independently. Archaeologists have found pottery styles influenced by Indus craftsmanship, yet decorated in ways unique to the frontier. They crafted tools using both local materials and traded stone. They participated in regional exchange networks, yet maintained ritual practices that differed from those in major Indus cities. This blend of familiarity and divergence paints a picture of cultural hybridity, a society connected to a powerful neighbor but never absorbed by it. One of the most striking discoveries associated with the frontier regions is the variety of burial practices found nowhere else in the Indus sphere. While major Indus cities leave minimal evidence of elaborate burials, frontier sites contain carefully arranged graves, some holding pottery offerings, ornaments, and symbolic objects. This suggests belief systems rich with ritual meaning, perhaps tied to ancestral veneration or protective rites. These burials stand as quiet markers of identity, small windows into a worldview that valued both the physical and spiritual aspects of existence. Yet for all their creativity and adaptability, these communities existed in landscapes that were both generous and unforgiving. Climate patterns played a powerful role in shaping their fate. As river courses shifted and monsoon patterns weakened, access to water became unreliable. Some settlements flourished only during periods of favorable climate, then declined abruptly when rain cycles changed. The frontier people were deeply tied to seasonal rhythms, and when those rhythms faltered, their delicate stability unraveled. It is here that the sense of mystery deepens. Many of these communities appear to vanish almost overnight, leaving behind clusters of abandoned homes, unfinished pottery, and tools still lying where they were last used. Their disappearance overlaps with the broader decline of the Indus civilization, yet the causes affecting frontier groups may have been more severe. Environmental stress hit marginal areas first. Trade networks collapsed, isolating smaller settlements. Loss of water sources made agriculture unreliable. And without the protective structure of a large urban system, frontier communities had fewer resources to cushion them against sudden change. Another layer of mystery comes from their sudden cultural transformation before disappearance. In some regions, pottery styles evolve rapidly, becoming rougher, simpler, stripped of earlier refinement. Settlement layouts shift. Ritual objects diminish or take on altered forms. It is as if a quiet cultural contraction occurred, a society drawing inward as external pressures mounted. These shifts create shadows in the archaeological record, subtle hints that something was changing at a pace too fast for tradition to keep up. There's also evidence of population movement, possibly migration toward more stable areas or toward emerging cultures in other parts of the subcontinent. But these movements leave only faint traces, like footprints washed away by time. Where exactly these people went, or whether they merged into other rising cultures, remains an unresolved question. The frontier societies dissolve from the record with almost a whisper, leaving behind a sense of unfinished narrative. Their sudden disappearance highlights a contrast we've seen before in this documentary: resilience coexisting with fragility. The frontier people lived adaptively, creatively, and in connection with powerful neighbors, yet they occupied lands where environmental shifts could change everything within a single generation. They developed unique cultural practices, yet those practices could not shield them from climatic collapse. They thrived near one of the world's greatest civilizations, yet that proximity offered no guarantee of survival. Despite the mystery surrounding their end, their legacy survives in small but meaningful ways. Their pottery styles influenced later regional traditions. Their burial customs hint at early roots of belief systems that later flourished in South Asia. Their village structures resemble layouts still found in rural communities today. In this way, though their society vanished swiftly, threads of their existence continue quietly through time. As we drift further into this nighttime exploration, the story of the Indus frontier becomes a meditation on the limits of human control. It reminds us that even when a society builds with knowledge, skill, and connection, nature's shifts can redraw the map of survival in an instant. Their disappearance was not marked by grand destruction or dramatic conquest, but by the slow tightening of environmental pressures that eventually became too great. The gentle bridge forward begins to take shape as this section softens toward its end. The frontier people stand as a reminder that even societies living in the shadow of greatness can be vulnerable to forces far beyond their reach. Their world fades quietly, leaving behind silence where vibrant life once flowed. And as we prepare to step into the next chapter of our journey, the landscape will shift once again. From river plains and desert edges to mountain fortresses, windswept valleys, and defensive stone walls belonging to another enigmatic people who vanished under even more abrupt circumstances. Ahead lies a culture of mountain dwellers whose disappearance echoes with uncertainty, conflict, and unanswered questions, a dramatic contrast to the gentle decline of the Indus frontier. High in the windswept mountains, where ridgelines carve harsh shadows across the land and valleys plunge into silent depths, a forgotten society once crafted its world among stone fortresses and hidden villages. Section 9 guides us through the enigmatic remnants of the KE Plains communities, a people whose identity is wrapped in layers of uncertainty, legend, and abrupt disappearance. They lived in high-elevation settlements fortified with meticulous stonework, occupying lands where winters were severe, summers brief, and dangers seemed to echo in the cold mountain air. Their existence feels as if it belonged to a different rhythm of time, one shaped by endurance, protection, and vigilance. Imagine the scene through a soft nighttime lens. A fortress perched on a rocky outcrop, its stone walls blending into the terrain like part of the earth itself. Torchlight flickering behind narrow embrasures, and mist moving silently across the mountainside. Life here required resilience. The KE Plains people had to adapt to steep slopes, unpredictable climate shifts, and scarce agricultural land. To survive, they turned their settlements into defensive sanctuaries, not grand cities, but hidden strongholds uniquely designed to keep them safe from threats both natural and human. What makes this society so intriguing is the hybrid nature of their architecture. Their fortresses combined elements from several early cultural traditions. Some walls resemble early Anatolian defensive styles, while inner buildings show influences from nomadic steppe cultures. This suggests a population that may have migrated, mingled with local groups, or adopted techniques from multiple neighboring societies. Yet the exact origin of these people remains unclear. Their material culture is distinct enough to separate them from nearby civilizations, but familiar enough to imply shared exchanges and intertwined histories. This blend of familiarity and mystery creates the perfect setting for a vanished society whose story still eludes full explanation. Artifacts found in the fortified settlements reveal a community that valued both protection and craftsmanship. They produced pottery with geometric carvings, tools crafted from mountain stone, and small iron objects that hint at early metallurgical skill. They wove textiles, raised livestock suited to high-altitude environments, and stored grains in stone-lined pits, signs of stability despite their harsh surroundings. Some excavations have revealed decorative items, such as carved bone pendants and metal amulets, suggesting spiritual beliefs tied to protection, possibly invoking mountain spirits, ancestral guardians, or sacred animals. Yet the fortresses themselves are the most striking legacy. Built with precision, many feature narrow passageways, strategic lookouts, and layered stone defenses designed to exploit the natural landscape. Some structures appear almost impossible to access without intimate knowledge of the terrain. This level of defensive planning hints at a society accustomed to threats, whether from rival groups, aggressive raiders, or shifting alliances. And this sense of constant vigilance adds to the mystery. Who were they defending themselves against, and why did they need such elaborate fortifications? Despite their solid stonework and strategic design, these mountain communities vanished with bewildering suddenness. Archaeological layers show signs of abrupt abandonment. Hearths were left full of ash. Pottery was left uncollected. Tools remained where they had been used last. Storage pits still held grain. The settlements do not display gradual decline, cultural transformation, or long-term reduction in population. Instead, they show a sudden break, as if the people rose one day and left without looking back. What could cause such an abrupt departure? Several theories have been proposed, each lingering like a quiet echo within the mountain landscape. One possibility is conflict. Some fortresses show subtle signs of damage: collapsed walls, scorch marks on interior stone, and scattered weapon fragments. Yet there are no mass graves, no large-scale destruction, and no clear evidence of conquest. If conflict occurred, it might have been swift, perhaps involving a threat so overwhelming that resistance was abandoned instantly. But the incomplete archaeological record leaves this idea suspended in uncertainty. Another theory involves climate. High-altitude settlements are exceptionally sensitive to environmental change. A shift in temperature, snowfall patterns, or water sources could make life abruptly unsustainable. If mountain springs dried or pastures became barren, these communities may have been forced to migrate quickly. This explanation aligns with other regional climate disruptions during certain historical periods, yet the speed of abandonment still feels unusual. A third possibility is disease. Isolated mountain groups could have been vulnerable to sudden outbreaks. If illness spread rapidly, survivors might have chosen to abandon contaminated settlements entirely. But without human remains indicating disease, this theory also remains unresolved. Then there's the possibility of forced migration, a political or cultural pressure that pushed these people to relocate en masse. This could have involved the expansion of larger powers in surrounding regions, displacement due to territorial conflicts, or absorption into another emerging society. Yet the suddenness of their departure and lack of follow-up settlements leaves this idea equally mysterious. In truth, the disappearance of the KE Plains people sits at the intersection of all these possibilities, and perhaps others yet unconsidered. Their vanishing feels like a mountain wind, swift, silent, and leaving almost no trace of its passing. What deepens the mystery further is the absence of clear continuity. Unlike the Jaman, whose genetic and cultural influence survived, or the Indus frontier communities who may have merged into nearby groups, the mountain fortress dwellers leave behind no definitive lineage. Their cultural traits do not reappear clearly in later regional societies. Their unique architectural techniques vanish from the archaeological record. Even their spiritual symbols seem to dissolve without transformation. This lack of continuity creates a strange void, a sense that an entire thread of human history simply ended without leaving a trace of what came next. As nighttime listeners settle deeper into the calm rhythm of this documentary, the story of these mountain fortresses becomes a reminder of how fragile even the strongest structures can be. Stone walls can endure, but the lives within them can vanish like breath in cold air. These settlements, perched high above the plains, now stand silent. Moss grows between the stones. Winds whistle through empty passageways. The defensive strategies, once so crucial, are now ghostly outlines of a society that prepared for threats, but perhaps could not foresee the final one that would end their existence. The emotional texture of this mystery sits between awe and melancholy, offer their ingenuity, strength, and adaptation to such demanding landscapes. Melancholy for the abruptness of their absence, the unanswered questions, and the human stories lost in the cold mountain winds. Their world feels close yet unreachable, a faint imprint of footsteps on stone that time has almost erased. As we gently transition from these mountains to the next chapter, the contrast becomes our guide once again. From fortress walls and high-altitude vigilance, we move toward a land shaped by valleys and open plains, where a very different kind of ancient society once thrived. One known for astronomical knowledge, unique rituals, and an equally mysterious disappearance. The journey ahead will carry us in landscapes defined not by fortresses, but by observatories, stone circles, and celestial alignments. And within those formations lies another story of a people who vanished almost as suddenly as they appeared. In a broad valley where mountains rise like dark guardians on every side, another enigmatic society once thrived, one not defined by fortresses or defensive walls, but by stones aligned with the heavens. Section 10 draws us into the world of the astral keepers of the Valley Circle, an ancient culture whose knowledge of the sky shaped their rituals, calendars, and identity. Their disappearance is as sudden as an eclipse and as puzzling as the stone formations they left behind. This society lived in a landscape where land, sky, and spirit converged, and the quiet geometry of their world holds secrets that continue to elude even modern researchers. As we imagine their valley under a gentle night sky, the stars above seem unusually bright. Perhaps that is how they appeared to the astral keepers, not as distant lights, but as guides, markers, and silent companions. This society constructed intricate stone circles, standing alignments, and ceremonial platforms placed with remarkable precision. Many of these structures align with solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, or specific constellations. Such accuracy suggests that the people of this valley possessed a deep understanding of astronomy long before formal science emerged. Their stones were not simple markers. They were cosmic instruments, carefully tuned to the rhythms of the sky. Life here centered around observation. The astral keepers track the rising and setting of celestial bodies, using the patterns to time migrations, harvest seasons, and ritual ceremonies. Some structures appear to record rare events, such as eclipses or planetary alignments, hinting at generations of meticulous observation. This suggests a society not only connected to the natural world, but actively interpreting it, seeking meaning in its cycles and trusting the sky to guide their daily life. Their settlements were modest compared to the fortified mountain societies. Homes were circular or oval, built from stone foundations and organic materials that have long since decayed. But what remains reveals a people organized around communal life, shared hearths, collective food storage, and central spaces dedicated to rituals. Pottery fragments show geometric patterns echoing the celestial motifs seen in their stone circles. Carved bone tools resemble small-scale versions of their monuments, perhaps used in teaching or ritual reenactments. These glimpses suggest a society where spirituality and science were inseparable, where the heavens were not distant mysteries, but intimate companions woven into every aspect of existence. Yet for all its harmony, this society met an abrupt end. The archaeological record indicates that the Valley Circle was abandoned suddenly. Construction of new stone structures stopped immediately. Hearths were left cold. Ritual objects were found mid-use. No signs of invasion or violent destruction appear in the ruins. No mass graves or defensive preparations mark their final days. Instead, there is a pervasive stillness, as if the entire community paused, stood in silence, and then vanished. Why did they leave? The theories are as varied as the constellations they once charted. One possibility is environmental change. Rivers in the region are known to shift dramatically over long periods, and a sudden alteration in the water source could have made the valley uninhabitable. Soil samples show fluctuations in fertility, hinting that the agricultural balance may have collapsed quickly. Crop failures could have forced the society to migrate, leaving their stone monuments behind as silent reminders of their former presence. Another possibility lies in their relationship with the sky. Some researchers believe that a dramatic celestial event, such as a long eclipse, an unusual comet, or a cluster of astronomical anomalies, might have triggered a spiritual crisis. If the astral keepers interpreted such events as signs or omens, they may have abandoned the valley in response to what they believed was a cosmic message. This theory is speculative, yet it aligns with the central role the heavens played in their identity. A third idea suggests internal transformation. The society may have undergone a shift in spiritual leadership or belief systems. If a new ideology emerged, one that challenged the value of the stone circles or called for relocation, the community might have abandoned their traditional sites to begin anew elsewhere. But the absence of follow-up settlements and the lack of evolving structures make this theory uncertain. Disease cannot be ruled out. Epidemics can strike isolated communities with devastating speed. Yet once again, no remains indicate widespread illness, leaving the theory suspended in ambiguity. In truth, the disappearance of the astral keepers remains a cosmic puzzle. Their valley, once alive with ritual gatherings and astronomical observations, now lies quiet. The stone circles stand like frozen echoes of a vanished language. Their alignments still track the movements of the heavens, but the people who once interpreted those signs have vanished into time. One of the most haunting aspects of this society is the precision of their structures. Some alignments match solar and lunar cycles with astonishing accuracy, surpassing what many would expect from a prehistoric community. This raises questions about how they developed such knowledge. Did they inherit traditions from even earlier cultures now lost? Did they dedicate entire generations to sky watching, accumulating data through centuries of patient observation? Or did they experience a unique convergence of environment, intellect, and spirituality that allowed them to achieve something extraordinary before fading away? The contrast between their intellectual achievements and their sudden disappearance deepens the mystery. How could a society so attuned to celestial cycles fail to foresee or prevent its own collapse? This contradiction creates the emotional center of their story. They understood the stars, but could not escape the forces that drove them from their valley. As we reflect on their world, a sense of calm wonder fills the narrative. The astral keepers remind us that knowledge does not guarantee permanence. Even the most enlightened societies can be swept away by unseen pressures. Their legacy endures not through written records or grand monuments, but through the silent conversation between stone and sky, a dialogue that continues long after human voices have faded. Walking through their valley today, one feels a deep stillness. Moss grows between ancient stones. Birds nest in hollows once used for ritual fire. Shadows move slowly across the alignments as the sun traces arcs the astral keepers once studied with reverence. The place feels suspended between earth and sky, as if waiting for someone to understand the message its builders left behind. This section invites listeners into that stillness, encouraging them to imagine the soft chants, the rhythmic footsteps, and the careful measurements that once animated the valley. It also prepares the ground for the next chapter in our journey. From celestial observations and spiritual alignments, we will shift once more into a different kind of enigma, a society shaped not by the heavens above, but by the shifting sands of desert trade routes and the unpredictability of nomadic life. As we leave the astral keeper's valley behind, the night sky remains unchanged, its quiet stars watching over landscapes both abandoned and enduring. Ahead lies another forgotten people whose disappearance echoes through the desert winds, mysterious traders whose world rose quickly and vanished even faster. Between the stone circles of the astral keepers and the sandy horizons of the next vanished culture lies a quiet, windswept pause, a moment suspended in time where the mysteries of one society gently fade and the whispers of another begin to rise. Section 11 serves as this soft bridge, carrying us from a valley shaped by celestial precision into a world shaped by trade, dunes, and drifting caravans. In this transitional space, the sky remains above us, but the landscape shifts beneath our feet, guiding us into a new chapter of history's most elusive disappearances. The echoes of the astral keepers linger for a while as we walk through this silence. Their stone circles, still aligned with the heavens, remind us that ancient societies often understood more than we give them credit for. Yet even with profound knowledge and delicate harmony, they vanished. That contrast, brilliance against disappearance, knowledge against fragility, becomes the quiet heartbeat of this bridge. It reminds us that the patterns of history are rarely linear. They ripple, overlap, dissolve, and reappear in forms both familiar and strange. As we move onward, a new theme begins to surface: movement. The astral keepers were rooted, grounded in one valley, their rituals tied to fixed points in the sky. But the next society we approach was the opposite. They were travelers, traders, wanderers of desert paths. Their lives followed shifting sands rather than predictable celestial cycles. They moved with caravans, carrying goods, stories, and symbols across vast distances. The contrast between these worlds, stillness versus motion, sets the stage for a deeper exploration of how mobility can be both a strength and a vulnerability. Trade winds become a metaphor as we continue across this bridge. In ancient times, winds guided caravans across deserts, bringing opportunity and danger in equal measure. They could carry travelers swiftly toward new horizons or strand entire groups in harsh conditions. In this transitional meditation, we imagine those winds brushing against our thoughts, carrying faint echoes of conversations once held around desert fires, of trade negotiations, of rituals performed under starlit dunes. These echoes prepare us for the world we are about to enter, a world shaped not by astronomy, but by exchange. This is also a moment to reflect on the interconnectedness of ancient societies. The astral keepers, isolated as they may seem now, likely interacted with distant cultures through trade routes that stretched farther than we might expect. Ideas traveled even where people did not, and the flow of goods often carried with it the flow of beliefs. The next society living in the shifting spaces of desert commerce, embodied this fluidity. They were simultaneously rooted in their traditions and stretched across wide distances by their trade networks. This dual existence, stable yet mobile, made them both resilient and fragile. Stories of desert traders often carry an air of romanticism, but the truth is more complex. Survival in such environments required precision, timing, and an intimate knowledge of the land. Just as the astral keepers charted the heavens, desert societies charted the winds and sands, reading the landscape like a living text. Their knowledge was equally profound, just expressed through different symbols. This parallel invites us to appreciate how different environments shape different forms of intelligence. It also frames the mystery of their disappearance in a new light. How does a society so attuned to mobility and adaptation vanish so completely? As this bridge continues, the atmosphere grows warmer, the air drier. The valley mists drift away, replaced by the vast openness of desert horizons. The ground beneath us becomes softer, textured with fine grains that shift beneath each step. The sky above remains the same, but the terrain tells a new story now. The transition feels like stepping from one page of an ancient manuscript to another, different ink, different symbols, yet part of shared tapestry. By the time we reach the end of this bridge, the trade winds feel closer, carrying the scent of distant spices, the rustle of camel caravans, and the hush of nomadic footsteps. Ahead lies a society whose world was built on movement, exchange, and the delicate networks that bind distant cultures together. Their sudden disappearance left gaps in trade routes, abandoned encampments swallowed by dunes, and traces of rituals now buried beneath shifting sands. With the echoes of the astral keepers settling behind us, we step forward into the desert, a place where history travels lightly, and mysteries are often carried away by the wind as quickly as they appear. Across the threshold of the shifting dunes, we enter the world of the sand-woven nomads, a society defined not by towering monuments or fortified cities, but by movement, adaptability, and an intimate relationship with the endless red expanse. Their story begins softly, carried on the winds that move like whispers across the desert. To understand them is to understand a way of life that treated the land not as something to be conquered, but as something to be read, respected, and survived through harmony rather than control. They lived lightly, leaving behind few physical traces, yet their presence once connected distant regions through vast trade routes that stretched across continents. The sand-woven nomads were known among surrounding cultures as master navigators of the dunes. Their reputation bordered on the legendary. Some claimed they could sense approaching sandstorms days before they formed, while others believed they used the stars to navigate with an accuracy matching that of astronomers in stone-built civilizations. In truth, their knowledge was likely a combination of acute observation, generational wisdom, and a worldview built around careful listening. Listening to the wind, to the desert's shifting textures, to the subtle behavior of animals, and to the rhythm of seasonal changes. Their mastery was not mystical. It was earned through intimacy with a landscape that punished the unprepared. Their society moved in beautifully coordinated caravans, long lines of travelers and animals winding across empty expanses like threads weaving a tapestry. These journeys formed the backbone of their culture. At night, their encampments glowed softly under the desert sky, arranged in deliberate patterns believed to mirror constellations. Some scholars suggest that these patterns functioned as both spiritual observances and practical navigation tools, reinforcing the relationship between earth and sky. Their tents, woven from desert grasses and dyed with red and gold pigments, fluttered like sails in the night wind, symbols of both fragility and resilience. Despite their mobility, the sand-woven nomads were not a small or simple society. They were organized in extended family bands, each with specific responsibilities and expertise. Some bands specialized in scouting routes, others in preserving food for long journeys, others in the crafting of unique woven goods that were highly prized in settlements they visited. Trade was their lifeline, and their caravans carried everything from rare herbs and spices to metal tools, ritual items, and even stories, for oral history was one of their most valuable exports. They connected distant cultures not only through goods, but through knowledge exchanged at caravan stops across the desert's edge. Their spiritual beliefs complemented their lifestyle. They worshipped a pantheon of wind spirits, desert guardians, and celestial figures, believing that every dune, gust, and shadow held meaning. Their rituals were gentle, involving soft chants, the drawing of symbolic lines in the sand, and offerings of woven charms meant to please the wandering spirits of the red expanse. Instead of temples, their sacred spaces were transient, wherever the wind allowed them to rest safely. This fluid spirituality made their beliefs difficult to record, and today, only fragments survive in the folklore of neighboring regions. The mystery of their disappearance, however, is what turns them from a fascinating society into a haunting enigma. One season, their caravans simply stopped arriving. Their trade routes went silent. Border settlements that relied on their visits waited for months, then years, before giving up hope. When search parties were eventually sent into the desert, they found only abandoned encampments half buried in sand, and each one seemed to have been left in perfect order. Cooking vessels were neatly stored. Water containers were sealed. Tents were anchored properly. It was as if the people had stood up and walked away in the middle of a calm afternoon, leaving behind the tools of survival as though they wouldn't be needing them again. The absence of signs of struggle or disaster only deepens the mystery. No footprints remained, no markings of predators, no scattered belongings that would indicate a sudden event. Some propose that a massive, slow-building drought pushed them farther into the desert until they reached a breaking point. Others argue that a rare, devastating sandstorm wiped out an entire generation of travelers who simply couldn't outrun it. Still others believe disease may have spread through the close-knit caravan groups, forcing them to isolate themselves deeper into the desert where they eventually succumbed. Yet none of these theories explain the uniform abandonment of sites across vast distances. Local folklore adds darker, more supernatural interpretations. Some stories tell of a silent wind, a spirit said to lure travelers away from their paths, leading them into a realm from which they could not return. Another tale speaks of an ancient pact among the nomads, that if a particular celestial alignment occurred, they would follow a guiding star into the deepest part of the desert to fulfill a prophecy. These ideas, while likely exaggerated, underline the cultural significance of their vanishing. The desert around them was already a place of myth. Their disappearance only intensified the sense that the red expanse held secrets beyond comprehension. Archaeologists who study the region today face immense challenges. The desert is constantly reshaped by wind, burying evidence, one season only to reveal something new the next. Sometimes fragments of woven charms are uncovered hundreds of miles from known routes, raising questions about how far the nomads actually traveled. In rare cases, collections of pottery shards appear in places too remote for typical caravans, suggesting that the society's footprint may have been much larger than previously assumed. Each discovery complicates the picture, hinting at a society that was both more expansive and more vulnerable than we realize. One particularly puzzling find involves clusters of stones arranged in patterns resembling the constellations the nomads used for navigation. These stone arrangements appear in locations that would have taken tremendous effort to reach, especially with large caravans. Some researchers speculate these were ritual sites, possibly marking transitions between seasons or guiding points across rarely used routes. Others believe they were memorials, placed to honor those who perished in the desert. Their purpose remains unknown, but their existence suggests the nomads had a deeper, more symbolic relationship with the landscape than surviving stories convey. As we reflect on their fate, the contrast between their deep knowledge of the desert and their sudden disappearance becomes even more striking. How could a people so attuned to environmental shifts vanish without leaving clear evidence? It challenges our assumptions about expertise, adaptation, and the limits of human resilience. Perhaps their disappearance was not a single event, but a cascade of pressures, climate changes, resource scarcity, internal conflict, or the slow unraveling of trade networks. Perhaps they dispersed into other cultures, their identity fading as they assimilated. Or perhaps the desert, vast and unpredictable, simply reclaimed them in a way nature occasionally does, quietly, completely, without drama. Yet even in their absence, the sandwoven nomads left a legacy. Their trade routes influenced the economic patterns of surrounding regions for centuries. Their knowledge of stars and sands inspired future travelers. Their woven symbols appear in designs still used in certain desert communities. And most importantly, their mystery survives, a quiet reminder that history contains stories not fully told, societies not fully understood, and truths that remain gently buried beneath the dunes. As the last traces of their world fade into the warm glow of the red expanse, we feel the pull of yet another mystery on the horizon. Ahead lies a society not shaped by desert winds or traveling caravans, but by waters, rituals, and a sudden moment of disappearance that left even more questions behind. Between the wavering heat of the red expanse and the cool breath of the coastal world that awaits us lies a moment of transition. A soft, contemplative bridge where sand begins to mingle with salt, and the story of the vanished nomads gently folds into the mystery of an entirely different ancient people. Section 13 serves as this quiet passage, guiding us from the fluid, ever-moving life of the desert caravans to a society shaped by water, ritual, and the weight of tides that rise and fall like a heartbeat. In this in-between space, we pause just long enough to let the echoes of the sand-woven nomads settle before allowing the next mystery to rise. As we walk across this transitional landscape, the desert slowly loosens its grip. The dunes become smaller, their edges softer. The air grows cooler, and a new texture emerges beneath our steps, sand still, but heavier now, tinged with moisture carried from distant shores. The wind, too, changes character. No longer the sharp, sweeping force of the red expanse. It becomes gentler, infused with hints of salt and distant waves crashing against unseen rock. This shift mirrors the larger thematic movement of the documentary, taking us from a culture defined by movement to one defined by anchoring, tradition, and ritual cycles tied to the sea. Here, in this quiet threshold, the contrasts sharpen. The nomads lived by motion, traversing wide landscapes where survival meant reading the wind. The next society lived by rhythm, the steady, predictable return of tides, the seasonal migrations of sea creatures, and the cyclical blessings they believed flowed from water spirits. One society drifted across open expanses, the other rooted itself in sacred coves and cliff sides, believing the ocean held both creation and destruction in its depths. This contrast helps ease the viewer into a new world while maintaining the calming momentum that carries the narration from one ancient enigma to the next. But before we step fully into that coastal realm, we allow ourselves a moment to reflect on what makes these transitions so compelling. There is something poetic in the idea that the mysteries of our world are not isolated, but connected by paths, desert routes, shoreline trails, and the quiet corridors of time. Cultures rise and vanish, but the landscapes they knew remain, shifting only in subtle ways. The sands bury, the waters erode, and the earth continues its silent work. Yet the echoes left behind, a pattern woven in red fabric, a stone carving facing the sea, continue to whisper across ages. This bridge section reminds us that each mystery flows into another, as seamlessly as land into shoreline. As we continue forward, faint traces of the sand-woven nomads linger like ghosts at the edge of memory. Perhaps some among them once journeyed farther than expected, reaching the shores we are now approaching. Perhaps they traded with the coastal people, exchanging salt for spices, fish for woven charms. Though no direct evidence confirms this, the imaginative possibility adds richness to our transition. After all, ancient cultures rarely lived in complete isolation. Even the most remote societies often brushed against distant neighbors in small but meaningful ways. The potential for overlap deepens the sense of continuity as we step toward the next vanished world. Soon the soundscape shifts again. The dry hush of the desert yields to a rhythmic murmur, waves rolling in slow, steady breaths. The sky opens wider, reflecting shades of muted blues and grays where once it blazed with desert heat. The scent of salt becomes unmistakable, blending with the earthy smell of cliffs and seagrass. With each step, the whispers of the nomads fade behind us, replaced by the feeling that we are approaching a place where rituals were performed not under starlit dunes, but on rock ledges overlooking ancient waters. A place where tides guided ceremonies, and where disappearance may have come as suddenly as a shifting current. This moment of transition invites us to consider how different environments shape not only survival strategies, but also belief systems. Where the desert demanded movement, the coastal world demanded balance. An understanding of when the sea offers abundance and when it takes it away. It required patience, timing, and reverence for forces larger than oneself. The society we are about to meet built its entire identity on this delicate relationship with water. And yet, despite their deep respect for the sea, they too vanished in a single, unexplainable moment that historians still struggle to unravel. As the sands beneath our feet grow darker, packed by moisture, and as gulls cry faintly overhead, we know the bridge is drawing to a close. Ahead lies a world shaped by cliffs, shells, carved stones, and ancient rituals tied to tide cycles that no longer have practitioners. A world whose silence today feels strangely heavy, as though its stories were washed away by a single great wave or swallowed by a force beyond human understanding. The dunes now fully behind us, and the sea whispering before us. We prepare to step into the domain of the tide-bound ancients, a society whose mysterious disappearance carries the weight and stillness of deep water. The desert's mysteries dissolve into the oceans, and the transition feels as natural as a shoreline carved gently by time. Where the desert winds give way to salt-laden air and the horizon shifts from shimmering dunes to the dark, endless blue of ancient waters, we encounter the world of the tide-bound ancients, a coastal society whose existence was shaped by rhythms far older than any kingdom and whose disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries whispered along forgotten shores. Their story begins on jagged cliffs and wind-carved coves, in villages built with meticulous care where every stone seemed positioned to honor the tides. To enter their world is to step into a realm where land and water were not opposites, but partners in a delicate dance that defined every aspect of life. The tide-bound ancients lived along a crescent-shaped coastline marked by natural stone terraces that descended toward the sea. These terraces, smoothed over generations, were used for rituals, gatherings, and astronomical observations that intertwined seamlessly with their deep understanding of tidal patterns. Their homes were constructed from a mixture of driftwood, shale, and a unique clay that hardened when exposed to sea mist, giving their structures a shimmering, almost pearlescent appearance. From afar, their settlements looked like clusters of seashells fused into the landscape, quiet, harmonious, and deeply connected to the water that sustained them. This society's daily life revolved around the ocean's pulse. They fished using a sophisticated system of tidal traps carved directly into rock formations, allowing them to gather food with minimal disruption to marine life. They harvested sea grasses to weave clothing, boats, and ceremonial items. Their diet, rituals, and even their timekeeping were influenced by the moon cycles. Theirs was a culture of observance, of watching the sea, learning its moods, and honoring the great forces they believed lived beneath the waves. Stories passed down through generations spoke of guardians of the deep, luminous entities that guided them, protected them, and occasionally tested them. At the heart of their spiritual life was the moon flood ceremony, a biannual ritual held during the highest tides of the year. Carved reliefs found on cliff walls depict robed figures standing at water's edge, arms raised toward the full moon as waves lapped around their feet. Offerings of shells, woven charms, and luminescent minerals were cast into the sea as tokens of gratitude. Some scholars believe these rituals serve practical purposes as well, helping the society track cyclical weather patterns and ocean fluctuations that could impact food supplies. Yet the beauty of these ceremonies suggests a spiritual depth beyond mere practicality, a reverence for water as both giver and taker of life. Despite their seemingly peaceful existence, the tide-bound ancients were not naive to the ocean's dangers. They built elevated storage huts to protect supplies from unexpected waves and created early warning markers carved into cliff faces to track rising sea levels. These markers form one of the most perplexing archaeological puzzles associated with this society. Over the years, researchers discovered that these carvings had been created with incredible precision, and that the highest markers predicted a waterline never reached in recorded history. Some argue these were symbolic thresholds, representations of mythic floods. Others believe they were forecasts, warnings of a future event the society feared but never witnessed, or perhaps one they did. The mystery of their extinction centers around what coastal folktales call the Night of the Vanishing Sea. Generations after the tide-bound ancients disappeared, fishermen from successor cultures recounted a story passed through the ages. That one night, the tide never returned. According to these legends, the sea pulled back extraordinarily far, exposing reefs, shipwrecks, and vast stretches of ocean floor no living person had ever seen. The shoreline expanded by miles. Then, as dawn approached, a single, massive wave emerged from the darkness, swallowing the coastline and dragging everything back into the deep. While these tales are embellished, they may reflect a historical event, a colossal tsunami triggered by an underwater earthquake or volcanic eruption. Physical evidence adds weight to this possibility. In several excavated sites once inhabited by the tide-bound ancients, layers of marine sediment abruptly cover domestic objects, clay vessels, fishing tools, woven garments hardened by salt deposits. In some locations, debris lines indicate sudden water displacement rather than gradual sea level rise. One settlement, perched on a high terrace once believed safe from ocean surges, was found flattened, with stones scattered inland in patterns consistent with forceful flooding. Yet the most haunting detail remains. No human remains were found at these sites, suggesting the people either fled or were swept away entirely. Other theories propose a slower, but equally devastating cause. Geological analyses hint at long-term tectonic instability in the region, including periodic land subsidence. Over centuries, the coastline may have gradually sunk, making settlements increasingly vulnerable to storms and floods. If this subsidence coincided with a large seismic event, the resulting devastation could have been total. Another theory focuses on food scarcity. Changes in ocean currents may have altered fish migration patterns, undermining the community's food system. Yet, again, these explanations struggle to account for the sudden, comprehensive nature of the disappearance. Then there are the more enigmatic possibilities, the ones wrapped in folklore. Some local myths claim the tide-bound ancients willingly followed their sea guardians into the depths during a celestial alignment. Others tell of a blue light, a phenomenon said to illuminate the ocean before great change. While these stories likely blend natural events with mythic coloration, they hint at the society's strong emotional and symbolic connection to the sea. If a dramatic natural occurrence took place, bioluminescent algae bloom, underwater volcanic glow, or unusual atmospheric effect, the people might have interpreted it within their spiritual framework, responding in ways we cannot fully reconstruct. What remains certain is that the tide-bound ancients left behind a trail of silent clues. Carved markers warn of water levels far higher than any recorded after their disappearance. Stone basins positioned along cliffs appear designed to collect seawater during extreme tides, possibly measuring anomalies or changes in salinity. One remarkable find includes a set of intricately engraved shells discovered deep within a collapsed cave. The engravings depict swirling lines and circular patterns interpreted by some researchers as tidal maps, or perhaps as symbolic narratives of a final event. Despite the mystery, the legacy of the tide-bound ancients echoes along coastlines still. Fishing techniques resembling their tidal traps appear in distant regions, suggesting their knowledge may have spread before their extinction. Certain weaving styles found among later coastal cultures trace their origins to the distinctive patterns of sea grasses used by the tide-bound ancients. And in rare moments during exceptionally low tides, locals still report glimpses of submerged structures far offshore, tantalizing hints of settlements pulled under long ago. As we conclude our exploration of their world, a profound contrast emerges. Here was a society that understood the sea intimately, its rhythms, its cycles, its generosity and fury, yet they vanished through an event likely tied to the very force they revered. Their story reminds us that knowledge does not guarantee safety, and reverence does not ensure survival. Nature moves with its own quiet power, beyond the reach of even the most attentive cultures. With the tide beginning to rise again in our imagination, we step back from the shore, carrying with us the echoes of ceremonies held under moonlight and the quiet ache of unanswered questions. Ahead lies the final section of our journey, a reflection on all the vanished worlds we have visited and on what their silent disappearances reveal about the fragility and resilience of human existence.